Amen to that. I really want to thank you all for the shout out and the prayer that you sent to me last week while I was away at my daughter's wedding in New York. I really needed those prayers, and they worked too. They absolutely worked, because while I was there, I managed to make it through the ceremony without breaking down. And that was my concern, yes. I wasn't afraid of a few tears or so, but being that I was officiating the ceremony, I was a little afraid of just breaking down and sobbing. I kind of thought that would be a rude interruption to the occasion. So we did go through with our plan. I told some of you about this plan that my daughter had a sound effects machine that she had found that she just loved. And the sound effects machine has 12 buttons, and each button you push would make a different sound, like, applause or laughter or a particular bodily function sound or something. So I gave the sound effect machine to my youngest daughter, Amanda, and she had it in her bridesmaid pocket. And we strategically planned 2 times when it was appropriate to use, and that was all good. And then I was about halfway through, and I felt it coming on. I felt like, if I read these next words, I just might lose it. And so I looked at Amanda and I said, now would be a wonderful time to use the sound machine, honey. And she pushed a button. Fortunately, it was not a bodily function sound. And that was all that I needed to just take a breath and move forward. Now, my daughter, the one getting married, Teresa, she didn't fare quite so well, because in the middle of her vows, I confess that she did. She let down and cried all over everything. It was wonderful, It was just wonderful. We just paused and took a moment, and it was beautiful. And it was perhaps the purest experience of joy that I think I ever had. I suppose it was that way the moment she was born, but all I know is it's the most recent experience of pure joy that I've ever had. You parents understand that. So anyway, so that's the wedding. If you want pictures, just go on my Facebook page. There's tons of pictures there. As I get them, I'm posting them, ad nauseum, One of my friends has sent me a link, which is not posted on Facebook, but it sent me a link for 500 photos. So if you really want to see that one, you let me know. So if you were here last week, you heard Reverend Bob deliver an amazing Sunday lesson. It was called The Next Step. The Next Step. And we all know that everybody in this room has a dream, a vision, a goal that you're working with. And there is a next step for that goal. There's a next step that you know that you can take. And sometimes it doesn't matter which step, it just matters that you take a step. And Bob asked you to commit to taking a next step, and then to email us and let us know, and just say, I did it. So we've been getting emails all week, and telephone calls too, that just say, I did it, I've done it, it's done. And I'm so proud of you who have taken those steps. One person left Bob a message and said that this particular next step was one she'd been considering and contemplating for a very long time. And I'll bet that's true for some of you. So whether you took the next step last week or not, everybody in the room has a next step, right? Because even when you take the next step, there's another next step. So what we're going to speak about today as we continue in this theme is, what are the things that get in the way of you taking your next step, of taking that step that you know you should, could, would, might choose to take, right? And I'm going to be pulling our material today from a wonderful brand new book called An Entrepreneur's Words to Live By. It's written by an author you may well know, Lee Harris, who's a member of our congregation. And Lee grew up in unity and has used the principles of unity to help build his successful life. And when I say successful life, it's a balanced life in his family as well as in his work. Lee is the president and CEO of Cohen Esri Real Estate Services, very successful in his work life and very successful in his home life with his wife, his 2 daughters, his grandson, his son-in-law. And he seeks to achieve balance in all areas of his life. So I'm going to be speaking liberally from this book today that I'm so grateful that Lee wrote. He has a way of taking our unity teachings and putting them into everyday speak. You know what I mean? His tips would speak to anyone, whether they'd ever been in a unity church or not. And yet, if you read this book, you'll see Unity Church of Overland Park all through it. And you'll see Unity's message all through it. So the first thing he says that can get in the way of your successfully taking those steps is what he calls the woulda, coulda, shoulda, coulda syndrome. Woulda, shoulda, coulda syndrome. You know that. It's the one where you look back at something that happened and you say, I should have known that I would have been more successful at this if only I could have done that, right? You know, you woulda, shoulda, coulda. But regretting the past gets you nowhere. In fact, it keeps you stuck in the past. And I'll give you an example of how it used to be for me. Maybe you've noticed that some of the Sunday lessons are a little more effective than others, right? Every now and then, I'll just lay an egg. You know, it just happens. And you are too polite to tell me that, but it just happens. And so early in my ministry, after one of those Sundays, I would be stricken with the woulda, coulda, shouldas. You know, I would think, I should have included this particular story. Oh my gosh, I could have used that scripture. Oh, if I'd only, you know. And here's the thing. I'd spend Sunday afternoon carrying the weight of it. And sometimes I would even carry the weight of it from that Sunday all the way to the next Sunday, in fear that I might repeat whatever it is I did or didn't do last week. Well, the good news is I don't do that anymore. The good news is I don't do that anymore. Although I will say that my husband is really good. He gets so excited by the messages that on Sunday afternoon, it's not unheard of for him to say, you know, you could have told this story. You could have told that one. But he does it, you know, we get kind of excited. It's like, well, yeah, we sure could have told. I sure could have told that one. So what you want to do is let go of the woulda, coulda, shouldas because they keep you in the past. Do you remember that scripture in the book of Genesis where Lot and his wife are fleeing the city of Sodom and Gomorrah? They're fleeing it, and they're rushing for their lives. And Lot's wife turns back. And in the moment she turns back, we're told she was turned into a pillar of salt. Now, salt, you know, is a preservative, right? So the symbolism here is that when she turned back to look at what was by now a smoldering city, when she turns back to look at it, she becomes permanently preserved in it, and it becomes permanently preserved in her, and she can no longer move forward. That's what happens. The woulda, coulda, shouldas keep you in the past. Now, related to the woulda, coulda, shouldas are the gonna, when, somedays. See how poetically is the gonna, when, somedays. Okay, the gonna, when, somedays are related. This is how this works. Pardon me. I'm gonna take... I'm gonna get my voice someday. Okay. I'm gonna take time for my kids someday when I'm not working so hard. I'm gonna become a prayer chaplain someday when I have more time. What are you going to do someday, right? The gonna do some days, this is all about deferring your joy. It's all about not choosing to be in this moment because your point of power is where? Now. It's here and now. It's not in the woulda, coulda, shouldas, and it's not in the gonna, when, some days. Let me give you an example. I just learned of a man who had lost his wife, sadly, to cancer this past year. And he has already found a new love. And he is pursuing this new love. And they may move in together before the end of the year. Now, some people would say to him, it's a little soon to be doing that, don't you think? But here's a man who responds by saying, you know what? I now fully understand that life can turn on a dime at any point. I mean, he and his wife didn't know she was going to get cancer. They'd been married for 30 years. His perspective is, I'm not going to wait till someday to experience my joy now. And that really brings us up, causes us to think deeply, doesn't it? Because life can turn on a dime either way. can turn on a dime. You don't know what tomorrow brings. So your point of power is in this moment, right now. So when you have the coulda, shoulda, wouldas, or when you have the gonna win somedays, what you want to do is to bring yourself back to this moment. You know, worrying about the past or the future gets you nowhere. You remember Jesus said in his Sermon on the Mount, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. And then he said, can any one of you by worrying add a single hour to your life? Can any one of you by worrying add a single hour to your life? Well, if we could, then I'm going to live to be a very ripe old age. A friend of Lee Harris's once told him, worry is like a rocking chair. It keeps you busy, but it doesn't get you anywhere. Right? Like a rocking, and that is the truth. All right. So the next tip that Lee gives in his book, An Entrepreneur's Words to Live By, is to admit and forgive your mistakes. Admit and forgive your mistakes. He says about mistakes, he says, mistakes are simply unfinished experiments in the laboratory of life. Do you like that? Unfinished experiments in the laboratory of life. All you perfectionists out there, you can just heave a sigh of relief. Oh, goody. I've just, made another step in my experiment in life when I make a mistake, right? And in fact, all successful business people know that you have to make mistakes. You have to be willing to make mistakes or you will not get ahead. So we've coined a new term in our staff. Well, it's not a new term really, it's new for us, and we call it experimenting. So when we have something new we want to try, we just call it an experiment. And we say, we're going to experiment with this and see how it goes. You know what? If it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll change it. I mean, what big deal is that? Instead of, struggling to find the exact perfect way to proceed, where there's no risk of any failure or any mistakes, we just say, let's try it. I mean, maybe you've noticed that we've tweaked our order of service a little bit. Maybe you've noticed that we moved all of the community highlights up to the front of the service. But the first Sunday that we did that, we moved them to the very front of the service, even before the opening prayer. And immediately we knew that didn't feel right. So we didn't throw it out, we tweaked it. And we arrived at something different, which seems to be working. So that's experimenting. It's okay to experiment. In fact, if you don't experiment and try new things, you'll never make the wonderful discoveries that come from mistakes. Bob talked last week about that famous mistake of all time that 3M made when they were trying to create this super, super enduring adhesive. And instead, they created something that didn't adhere very well at all. Thus was born Post-it notes. Now, I know that every mistake you make isn't going to be a Post-it note. Some of your mistakes are going to be trash. But that's how we learn and how we grow. In his book, Lee talks about a highly regarded business coach by the name of Paul Lemberg, and he's coined a term called rapid prototyping. Rapid prototyping. Listen to this. He says, this technical sounding phrase simply means doing things quickly, making mistakes and swiftly fixing them. Get something up and running, anything that resembles your desired solution. Then fix what isn't working, and fix and fix and fix. This may be the best way to do product development in internet time. Okay, so you're thinking about the next step, and you're wondering with your dream or your vision or your goal, what's the right next step to take? Here's what this says. Rapid prototyping says, just take a step. Just take a step that's kind of sort of in the direction that you want to go. Right? You can course correct along the way, can't you? So if you move a little too far to the right, that's okay, then you move a little more to the left. Life will naturally help you course correct. Just take a step. And then tweak as you go along. And doesn't that make sense in today's world? Because my goodness, as fast-paced as we are in internet time. Everything is in internet time. The idea that you have today in this moment is already being had by somebody else. So you've got to get out there with your idea or whatever your next step might be in your life. Now, I know a thing or two about mistakes because I have made them. I know that will surprise you. But I have made them, and one which I may have shared with you before, but just really ranks up there as one of my all-time great mistakes that I've made, was back when I was in banking. And I had just been promoted to the role of regional manager. I had 9 branch banks that I was to be managing. Now, the thing is, I'd never worked in a branch before. I was never been a teller. I'd never been a manager. But here I was, promoted to this position. So, I said yes, and I dived in. And not long after I had the role, a memo went around about a new policy, something about lowering our vault cash limits. Well, I didn't really understand what that meant exactly, so, it went off to the side. But what it meant was that all of the branches were to lower the amount of cash that they carried in their vaults by a certain amount. They had new target goals and procedures for getting to those target goals, for getting rid of the cash they had, and so on and so forth. Well, eventually, I would have figured it out, but I didn't figure it out quickly enough because one of my branches was robbed. Everybody was okay, but the branch had more than twice what it should have had in the vault. It was a $20,000 mistake. So I went into my boss ready to resign. I knew that I'd screwed up. I was ready to resign, and he said, "Are you kidding? We just spent $20,000 teaching you a lesson." It's true. And I went on to work at that organization for a number of additional years, and I learned my lesson. I learned to read those operational memos and come to understand them. I did learn. You see, the past is good for a couple of things. It's good for remembering the positive memories. I could just sit here and reminisce about my daughter's wedding for another 30 minutes, but I don't think you want me to. It's also good for learning your lessons and taking those with you. When you admit your mistakes and you forgive yourself for them, what you also want to do is learn from those mistakes, right? All right, so the next step that I want to talk about is related to this, and it's don't be a victim. Because you see, I could easily, in fact, I did, I'll confess I did. After that robbery, thoughts went through my head like, well, why did they promote me so fast anyway? Clearly I wasn't prepared. Somebody should have trained me better, right? If they'd only sent out memos that were clear, then I would have known how to follow it. All of that was pointing the finger elsewhere. All of that was me being a victim. And here's what Lee says about that. Why is being a victim so bad? He says, because you are admitting that someone else controls your destiny. We all have the power of choice. We may not always like our options, but we still get to choose. We all have the power of choice. We may not like our options, but we get the power to choose. And here's the thing. So when I chosen to blame my manager, or had I chosen to blame the operations people, or whomever, I'm pointing a finger at them. And whenever you are pointing a finger at someone, what you are doing is taking your power out and giving it to them. Whenever you are blaming someone else, you are saying that you are powerless, that you have no choice. And so whenever we say, well, it's his fault, it's her fault, it's the weather's fault, it's the this's fault, what we're doing is taking the power out of ourselves and placing it out there. But we in Unity know better than this, right? You and I know better than this. We speak about this every Sunday. Where is your power? Yes, it's in the present moment, and it is right within you. It is right within you. Because each of you, each of us is a God being. Lee gives some examples in his book, which are kind of hard to hear, but I want you to listen to them anyway. So here's one. Well, I would have been able to attend my son's school play if it hadn't been for the last-minute meeting that I had to attend. It's easy to blame it on the meeting, right? But a truer statement would have been to say, a last meeting came up and I chose to attend the meeting. Do you hear the difference in claiming your power? You may not like your options, but when you realize you have the power to choose, then you've taken the power back. You've reclaimed your power. Or this one. I would exercise more, but I just don't have the time. Anybody here ever said that? Like, how many times have we said that? I've said it before, but it isn't true. Not really. I have the time. I just choose to do other things with it. Now, I can say that. I choose to do something else, and it is my choice. That puts the power back within me. That would be a much truer statement. Or maybe some of you right out there today are saying things like, well, I'd like to be in a fall faith circle this year, but I don't really have the time. I thought about becoming a prayer chaplain. I thought about becoming a member of the church, but I thought about taking this next step, but, okay, the key word here is but. You want to pay attention to your buts, right? Whenever you say the word but, really pay attention to what is on the other side of that sentence. And then you can reclaim the sentence and say, but I choose, or I chose, or I will choose this. That keeps the power within you. It acknowledges that you are a powerful being. Wayne Dyer said, all blame is a waste of time. No matter how much fault you find with another, and regardless of how much you blame him, it will not change you. Now, the astute among you here today have noticed something, that all of the things I mentioned here have one thing in common. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. Where does that take place? In the mind. Gonna win someday. Where does that take place? In the mind. Accepting and learning from and forgiving your mistakes. Where does that take place? In the mind. Choosing not to be a victim. In the mind. And we have a choice as to what we allow to take up residence in our minds, you and I. When we notice all of those things I've just mentioned, we can choose a different thought. We can choose a different thought. Lee Harris says in his book, he says, I'm not a glass half full guy or a glass half empty guy. I'm a glass overflowing guy. And he is, if you know Lee. He is. And we are too, you are too, as well. This whole year we've been talking about discovering the power within you. Well, here's what I want to say today. Your next step is up to you. Your next step is up to you. The Apostle Paul said that the power that is within you, he said the one that is within you is greater than the one that is of the world. God in you, and all the wisdom, intelligence, resourcefulness, strength, power, love, all that God is in you is greater than whatever it is that you face. So your next step is up to you. It's up to you. It's not in the past. It's not in the future. It's not in perfection. And it's not in being a victim. It's up to you. There's a woman in our country right now from Myanmar, which was formerly Burma. Her name is Aung San Suu Kyi. She's fighting for democracy in her country. And this is especially close and dear to my heart because my daughter, the one that just got married, lives in New Zealand, and she works and supports refugees, and she's adopted a family from Myanmar, helped them to resettle, and helped one of them through the birth of the newest baby. And so for Myanmar to grow in democracy is personal to me as well as a laudable virtue. And this woman, Aung San Suu Kyi, has won the Nobel Peace Prize for fighting for democracy, and she was such a strong leader that they placed her in house arrest for 15 years. For 15 years, she could not leave her home. And I was watching an interview with her over the weekend, the Friday night news, and the interviewer asked her, how come in that 15 years you didn't give up? And Aung San Suu Kyi said, "It never occurred to me to give up. It never occurred to me to give up." It never occurred to her to give up. Even if she was bound to her home, the dream of democracy was so strong in her heart and had been in her father's heart that she was committed to it until whatever the next step would take. Never give up. Never give up. Be willing to make mistakes and tweak and course correct along the way, but never give up. And never give your power away. Always know that you're not alone, because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is of the world. And so let me close with this quote from Jim Rohn, another entrepreneur. He said, "You must take personal responsibility. You cannot change the circumstances, the seasons, or the wind. But you can change yourself. The next step, it's up to you." God bless you.